So there's lots of backcountry shelters to choose from, and you really have to consider a bunch of things when you're looking to either purchase a shelter or for which shelter you're going to take on a trip. It's not a one-size-fits-all kind of deal. The longer you do this, you're going to end up with a lot of different shelters to fit different needs, different environments, etc. But you know, some of the things that I take into consideration when I'm looking for a shelter for a certain trip is, what's the weather going to be? You know, is it going to be rainy like this? Is it going to be sunny? Is it going to be snowy? What are the winds going to do? Some of these shelters are going to hold up better in high winds than others. What's the terrain going to be like? So, you know, am I going to have a big area like this to kind of you know, throw a big teepee tent down, or am I going to be, you know, crashing in deer beds at night and don't have a lot of room to maneuver? You know, what experience do you have? Some of these shelters take a lot more experience in setup. Also, that you make sure you've got a dialed clothing system. You know, so you have to factor experience in as well. But there's lots of things to consider, like anchors. So what's the terrain like and what anchors is it going to provide me? Can I use rocks? Can I use natural vegetation? Am I going to be able to use my trekking poles? Do I have skis or snowshoes? Most of the time I leave the stakes at home. I don't bring you know, the manufactured provided stakes. I use a lot of natural anchors. So one, it saves me some weight. Little room in my pack, but also it gives me the ability to just throw my shelter down anywhere and adapt to that environment and build anchors as I need to. So I take all these things into consideration as I'm trying to pick that shelter for that particular trip. So, you know, there's essentially tents, there's teepees, there's tarps, and there's Bivysack. So these are the four general types of shelters, you know, that we have to choose from. There's tons of different options in tents. There's 2, 3, and 4 person tents. Generally, I shy away from 2-person tents. That's just a lot of mosquito netting. They're very lightweight. You know, I tend to not go out in you know, conditions that are conducive to that. I generally choose 3 or 4 season tents. They're a little more robust. They have some mosquito netting, but they can really hold up to high winds, heavy rains. You know, they have some durability. Some have vestibules like this one, and some don't. So, you know, vestibules are great with the tent because that allows me to keep my boots outside, my pack and my weapon, you know, dry, to keep the tent or the stove outside the tent. You know, so vestibules are nice, where this one here doesn't have any vestibule. There's also single and double wall tents. So this yellow tent here, that material is the waterproof tent. That's one layer of material. These aren't going to breathe as well in conditions like we're in right now, the kind of heavy dew point, high humidity, but they do really well in extreme cold. Whereas a double wall tent is kind of like your go-to. You know, it's going to breathe really well. So the exterior is waterproof, the rain fly, and then the yellow tent inside is highly breathable. So the moisture leaves the tent. You don't wake up with a lot of condensation inside. And then finally, you have the option of a freestanding tent or not. So these tents are freestanding, which means once I have the poles in there, I have a structure, a sound structure. I just need to anchor it down. Whereas some tents, they completely rely on the anchors to hold the structure of the tent. And if those anchors fail, then the structural integrity of the shelter fails, and you wake up and you have no shelter around you. So all those things, you know, you take into consideration on tents. Most of us are going to default to a tent. You know, I personally like a 3 or 4 season, depending on what I'm doing, small 2-person tent. I can put a buddy in there, or I can, you know, kind of get in there by myself with all my kit if the weather's going to be inclement. And you can get some really lightweight options that hold up to some really strong winds and weather. Teepees, on the other hand, you know, these are becoming more popular. There's lots of different sizes. They do really well in winds if you have them adequately staked down. The thing is, you have to have not only anchors, but multiple anchors to keep you know, a teepee anchored down. But if you do, it's very sound in the wind. You have to consider though what those anchors are going to be and kind of plan ahead. So are you going to use stakes? Are you going to use a lot of natural you know, anchors that are provided? They don't breathe really well, and that's inherent just to the material that they're made out of. So if you have a couple people inside, it's kind of more inclement weather like this, you could have a lot of condensation buildup because you're not going to be able to ventilate, you know, unzip and ventilate in weather like this, especially if it gets heavier, because you're just going to let water in or snow in, etc. So again, take those things into consideration. But the nice thing about a teepee is that you can put a wood stove in there. So that wood stove is going to provide a lot of heat. It's going to allow you to dry some gear out. It's going to allow you to dry yourself out. You know, but again, if that fire starts to burn down in the, you know, kind of the middle of the night, that's when condensation can start to build up. So, you know, you have to kind of consider that. But the weight to person ratio of a teepee, you know, is almost unmatched for the protection that it provides you. So, you know, they're a great option. I tend to use them a lot more for a base camp type tent. Or like a cook tent that, you know, I put several hundred meters away from my main camp, you know, if I'm in grizzly bear country. But, you know, they're definitely a consideration, and there's some really good options on the market. Now, next is tarps. And tarps take a lot of experience to be able to set up, especially in inclement weather, high winds, rain. You know, in the dark. You really want to have a system dialed before you rely on a tarp for your main shelter. But they're great to keep you out of the sun and the wind when you're glassing and things like that. They're great to get under for like again, like a cook tent, a cook shack. But you kind of have to figure out what those anchors are, because they're critical, you know, to how the tarps gets set up. Like, I've used some bungee cords here, which is a great quick trick to set up tarps. We've got a trekking pole, we've got, you know, a stick, and then we've got a couple stakes. So, you know, kind of a hodgepodge to kind of figure this out in this one particular area. You're going to get crushed by bugs with the tarp. So that's one thing you have to take into consideration. And then if you do have high winds, you're going to have to modify the structure potentially if those winds begin to shift. What a lot of people do is they'll bring a tarp, but then they'll bring a Bivysack to put under the tarp. So the tarp provides more overhead cover, and then the Bivysack allows them to just slide inside. And what a Bivysack is it's a waterproof covering for you and your sleeping bag. So, you know, you slide your ground pad, you slide your sleeping bag, and you slide yourself inside there. Now, there's not going to be any room for gear. So if you don't bring a tarp, your kit's literally, you're going to be exposed to the elements, you know. So maybe you get under a tree, you know, maybe you get under a rock ledge. You have to kind of figure that out. But if you're claustrophobic at all, a Bivysack is not going to be the most enjoyable thing. Also, if you're, you know, out in the elements like today where it's raining, or if it's snowing a lot, you know, water's going to start to pool on top of the Bivysack. I've been out in heavy snows where snow starts to build up and you start to feel like it's pressing on you. You got to continue to move during the middle of the night to move the snow off you. They don't breathe very well at all, no matter what material they're made out of, because it's laying directly on top of you. You're sleeping. You know, your metabolism's kind of stalled out because you're not eating in the middle of the night. You're kind of resting, so they don't breathe real well. So a lot of times you can wake up with you know, some damp clothing. So you have to take all these things into consideration. Now, some Bivysacks like this have a hoop, so that keeps the material off my face. I can get in there. I can actually put my boots at the head of this. This does have some mosquito netting that I can zip in, so that's pretty nice. But my gear, again, is going to have to sit outside. So I actually used this Bivysack several times last year on some elk hunts. And, you know, I knew it because I had done this, but it's important to test fit the Bivysack before you actually go out. So this Bivysack here in particular, when I put my inflatable ground pad inside, and I do that to protect it so it's not exposed to cactus and rocks and damage, and then my sleeping bag, and then when I slide inside there, it's a tight fit. But I know that, right? If I didn't know that, you know, and I got in there, maybe it wouldn't fit, and all of a sudden I'd have to start jockeying things around, maybe put the ground pad on the outside, maybe the ground pad pops. So you want to test fit a Bivysack because there's not a lot of room like a tarp or a tent or a teepee. So it's critical that you kind of figure that out in advance. So, you know, in the end, there's lots of things to think about. There is no one size fits all backcountry shelter. There's lots of options, and you know, the longer you go into the backcountry, the more environments you go into, you know, different times a year, pursuing different species or different activities, you're going to end up with a lot of different shelters kind of in your quiver, and then you just apply kind of some planning and going, okay, this is the particular one for this trip, but it's going to be a different shelter for this trip. And when you take that into consideration, you're going to be able to choose the right shelter, which is critical for safety, comfort, and success in the backcountry the next time you go out.